The millionaire's twin boys wouldn't stop crying at his daughter's wedding until a 7-year-old homeless girl sneaked in and did something that moved everyone. And he changed her life forever. Before we tell this tale, hit like and comment where you're watching from and one word that describes you. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the grand ballroom of the Riverside Manor as Rebecca Harrison's wedding reception reached its peak celebration. 300 guests mingled beneath towering floral arrangements that had cost more than most people earned in a year, their laughter mixing with the gentle melody of the string quartet positioned near the marble fountain. But amidst all this elegance, all this carefully orchestrated perfection, a piercing sound cut through the festivities like a knife through silk. The twins were crying again. Richard Harrison, at 62 years old, held his 3-month-old sons against his chest, bouncing them desperately as their wails grew louder with each passing minute. Michael and Matthew, identical in every way except for the tiny birthmark on Michael's left cheek, seemed inconsolable despite his every effort. The guests tried to maintain their conversations about business deals and vacation plans, but heads kept turning toward the commotion with barely concealed irritation. "Dad, maybe you should take them upstairs to the nursery," Rebecca whispered urgently, her 28-year-old face flushed with embarrassment as her wedding dress rustled around her. Her new husband, David Brennan, stood nearby with his jaw tightened and his expensive tuxedo wrinkled from stress, clearly calculating how much this disruption was costing them in social capital. Richard's weathered hands, which had built a construction empire from absolutely nothing over 4 decades, trembled slightly as he adjusted the babies against his shoulder. He'd held thousands of blueprints, signed million-dollar contracts, commanded respect from the toughest crews in the business. But these 2 tiny humans had him completely defeated. "I've tried everything, sweetheart," he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "They've been like this for weeks now, ever since." He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the words that would make it real again. Ever since Margaret died, giving birth to them 3 months ago, leaving him to navigate fatherhood at an age when most men were thinking about retirement. The irony wasn't lost on him. These boys, who should have been the greatest joy of his later years, the unexpected blessing he and Margaret had prayed for after Rebecca grew up and moved out, had become a constant reminder of his greatest loss. Margaret had waited until they were both 59 to try for children again, after the doctor said it might be their last chance. "Maybe we should call Dr. Peterson again," Rebecca suggested, glancing around nervously as more guests began edging toward the exits. "There has to be something wrong with them medically. Babies don't cry like this without reason." "We've seen 6 different pediatricians," Richard replied, his exhaustion evident in every word. "They all say the same thing: healthy babies, perfect lungs, probably just colicky, it'll pass eventually." But deep in his heart, Richard knew this wasn't ordinary colic. There was something almost desperate about the way the twins cried, as if they were searching for something, calling for someone who would never answer. "Mr. Harrison?" A small voice piped up from somewhere near his elbow, barely audible above the chaos. Richard looked down to see a little girl, maybe 7 years old, with tangled blonde hair that looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks, and clothes that had clearly seen better days. Her bright blue eyes stared up at him with unusual intensity for someone so young, and there was something in her expression that reminded him of Margaret, a kind of gentle wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "Sweetheart, this isn't the place for children to be wandering around," Rebecca said gently, glancing around desperately for the girl's parents while trying to maintain her composure. "Where's your mommy and daddy?" But the little girl ignored her completely, stepping closer to Richard with a confidence that was startling. "I can make them stop crying," she said, with quiet certainty that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. The twins' cries reached a crescendo that made several crystal glasses on nearby tables actually vibrate. And David's face grew redder by the minute as he watched his carefully planned reception dissolving into chaos. Richard found himself kneeling down to the little girl's level before his logical mind could object to this absurd situation. What did he have to lose at this point? The twins had been crying for 3 straight hours. Nothing the doctors prescribed had worked, and his daughter's wedding reception was turning into a complete disaster. Half the guests had already made their excuses and left, and the other half were checking their watches. The little girl, who still hadn't told them her name, positioned herself directly in front of Richard with the serious demeanor of someone much older. She studied the crying babies with intense concentration, as if she could see something the adults couldn't. Her clothes were worn and patched in several places, and Richard noticed she was far too thin for a child her age. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, trying to be heard over the twins' wails. "Emma Louise Miller," she replied without taking her eyes off the babies. "But most people around here just call me the Bridge Girl, on account of where I live." Rebecca shot Richard a concerned look. A child living under a bridge? How was that possible in their affluent suburban community? Emma closed her eyes and began to hum, so softly at first that it was almost inaudible beneath the baby's desperate cries. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, with a quality that seemed to reach directly into the soul. Then she began to sing in a voice that was pure and sweet and somehow ancient. "Sleep now, my darlings, the stars shine above, wrapped in the warmth of your mother's sweet love. Though I'm not with you, I'm never far away, watching over you both, night and day. Close your sweet eyes. Let the angels draw near. Mama's love surrounds you. There's nothing to fear. Dream of tomorrow and all you will be, safe in the knowledge that Mama loves thee." Richard's blood turned to ice water in his veins. His knees nearly buckled as the words washed over him like a tidal wave of memory and grief. Those lyrics, dear God, he knew those exact lyrics. Margaret had written them during her pregnancy, humming the melody while she rubbed her growing belly during those long evenings when she couldn't sleep. She'd called it her lullaby for the boys, working on it secretly in her journal, planning to teach it to them after they were born. But she'd never had the chance to sing it to anyone. The effect on the twins was immediate and absolutely startling. Their cries began to soften almost instantly, their tiny fists unclenching as they turned their faces toward the sweet, pure voice. Michael's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise, and Matthew actually smiled, the first real smile Richard had seen from either of them. Within moments, both babies had fallen completely silent, their dark eyes wide and focused entirely on the mysterious little girl who somehow knew their mother's secret song. The entire ballroom had gone dead quiet. 300 wedding guests stood frozen like statues, watching this impossible scene unfold before their eyes. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, their instruments hanging forgotten in their hands. "How?" Richard's voice came out as barely a whisper, his throat constricted with emotion. "How in God's name do you know that song? Where did you learn it?" Emma opened her eyes, and Richard saw tears streaming down her thin cheeks. "The lady with the pretty brown hair taught it to me," she said simply. "She said her babies would need it someday, but she wouldn't be there to sing it to them herself. She made me promise to find them if I ever saw twin boys crying like their hearts were broken." The room seemed to spin around Richard like a carnival ride gone wrong. Margaret had died exactly 3 months ago during an emergency C-section, and this homeless child claimed to have learned the unfinished lullaby directly from her. But that was completely impossible. Margaret had never written the words down anywhere except in her private journal, never sung them for anyone else, never even hummed the full melody where Richard could hear it clearly. "What lady?" Rebecca demanded, her voice tight with confusion and something that might have been fear. "Emma, I need you to tell us exactly what lady you're talking about." Emma wiped her nose with the back of her small hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her pale cheek. The twins remained completely calm in Richard's arms, making soft cooing sounds as if they were trying to encourage her to keep talking. "The one who comes to the bridge sometimes, usually right around sunset," Emma explained, with the matter-of-fact tone children use when adults ask obvious questions. "Where I sleep under the old railway overpass. She's very sad most of the time, but she has the prettiest songs I ever heard. Always wearing a blue dress that moves like water, and she smells like those white flowers that bloom in spring." Richard felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Margaret's favourite dress had been powder blue, and she'd always worn jasmine perfume. The old railway overpass was less than 2 miles from their house, part of the walking trail where Margaret had spent her final weeks trying to work through her anxiety about the high-risk pregnancy. "When did you first see this lady?" Rebecca asked, her wedding makeup starting to run as her own eyes filled with tears. "About a month after I got to the bridge, so maybe 7 months ago," Emma replied, settling cross-legged on the marble floor as if she planned to stay for a while. "I was having a real bad night, scared and hungry and missing my mama something awful. Then this pretty lady just appeared, sitting right next to me like she'd been there all along." Richard's hands began to shake violently. 7 months ago was exactly when Margaret's pregnancy had become complicated, when she'd started taking those long, worried walks to calm her nerves. She didn't talk much at first, just sat with me and hummed these beautiful songs. Made me feel less alone, you know? Like maybe everything was going to be okay after all. Emma's voice grew softer, more distant. She kept coming back, maybe once or twice a week, always bringing new songs, always so gentle and kind. The wedding guests had formed a circle around them now, drawn by the impossibility of what they were witnessing. Mrs. Pemberton from the country club was openly weeping, and even David had stopped checking his watch. "One night, maybe 2 weeks ago, she seemed different," Emma continued. "Excited, like she'd figured out something important. She taught me that lullaby real careful, made me sing it back to her 5 times until I had every note perfect. Then she took my hands and looked right into my eyes and said, 'Soon, Emma, very soon you'll meet 2 little boys who desperately need this song, and when you sing it to them, everything will change for all of you.'" Richard couldn't breathe. 2 weeks ago was exactly when the twins' crying had escalated from normal infant fussiness to the desperate, inconsolable wailing that had driven him to the edge of madness. "She told me to watch for a big celebration with lots of fancy people and flowers everywhere," Emma added. "Said I'd know the babies when I saw them, because they'd be crying like their little hearts were breaking, just like mine was that first night on the bridge." "Emma, sweetheart," Richard managed to croak out, "what happened to your mama? Why are you living under a bridge instead of with your family?" The little girl's face clouded over. "Mama got the bad cough last winter and couldn't work at the diner no more. We lost our apartment, and then she got sicker and sicker. The hospital tried to help, but—" She shrugged with the resigned acceptance of someone far too young to understand such loss. "After she went to heaven, the social service people wanted to put me in a home, but I heard some older kids talking about how mean some of those places can be. So I ran away and found the bridge. It's not so bad, really. People leave food sometimes, and I got a sleeping bag from the donation box at the church." Rebecca pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. This child had been surviving on her own for months, and somehow, impossibly, Margaret had found her. 20 minutes later, the wedding reception had effectively ended, but nobody seemed to mind. The remaining guests had gathered in small groups throughout the ballroom, speaking in hushed, amazed tones about what they'd just witnessed. Richard sat in a quiet corner with Emma beside him, the twins sleeping peacefully in a portable crib that Mrs. Chen, his housekeeper, had miraculously produced from somewhere upstairs. Rebecca approached slowly, having shed her wedding veil and changed into more comfortable shoes. David had finally relaxed enough to remove his jacket and actually smile, apparently won over by the sheer impossibility of the situation. "Emma, honey," Rebecca said gently, settling into the chair across from them, "I need to ask you something very important, and I want you to tell me the absolute truth, okay?" Emma nodded solemnly, her small hands folded properly in her lap, despite her obvious exhaustion. "The lady who taught you the song, can you describe her more?" "What did her face look like?" Emma closed her eyes, concentrating. "She had kind brown eyes, like yours, but sadder. Long brown hair that she wore in a braid sometimes, and a scar right here." She touched her own forehead, just above her left eyebrow, shaped like a tiny crescent moon. Richard's world tilted sideways. Margaret had gotten that exact scar in a childhood accident, and she'd been self-conscious about it her entire life, always arranging her hair to hide it. There was absolutely no way this homeless child could know about it unless she'd seen it herself. "There's something else," Emma continued, opening her eyes. "She always wore a gold necklace with two little birds on it, said it reminded her that love comes in pairs, and even when one bird flies away, the other one keeps singing." Rebecca gasped audibly. The necklace had been Margaret's most treasured possession, a wedding gift from Richard that she'd never taken off. They'd buried her wearing it. "Emma," Richard said carefully, his voice thick with emotion, "did this lady ever tell you her name?" "She said to call her Maggie. Said that's what people who loved her called her." Emma looked confused by all their reactions. "Why are you all crying? Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Richard managed to say through his tears. "You did something absolutely perfect. That lady, Maggie, was my wife. She was the mother of these babies, and she loved them so much that she found a way to take care of them even after she couldn't be here anymore." Emma's eyes widened with understanding. "So the babies are her babies, the ones she was so worried about?" "Yes, and somehow she knew they would need you." For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the twins sleep more peacefully than they had since the day they were born. Other guests began approaching cautiously, wanting to meet the little girl who had performed such an impossible miracle. Mrs. Pemberton, the 70-year-old matriarch of the country club set, knelt down beside Emma's chair with surprising grace. "My dear child," she said softly, "I've lived a long life and seen many things I couldn't explain, but nothing like this. You've been touched by something very special." Emma smiled shyly. "Maggie said angels come in all sizes, and sometimes the littlest ones can do the biggest things." Richard felt Margaret's presence so strongly at that moment that he actually turned around, expecting to see her standing behind him. Instead, he saw his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, approaching with a concerned expression. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, "I took the liberty of calling my friend who works at Children's Services. Emma's file shows her mother, Linda Miller, died of pneumonia 8 months ago. She's been officially missing since then, and they've been actively searching for her." The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the Harrison Mansion's kitchen, as Emma sat at the breakfast table, methodically working her way through her third helping of scrambled eggs and toast. Richard watched in amazement as she ate with the focused intensity of someone who had never been certain where her next meal would come from. The twins sat in their high chairs nearby, content and alert, for the first time since they'd come home from the hospital 3 months ago. Every time one of them showed the slightest sign of fussiness, Emma would automatically hum a few bars of the lullaby, and they'd settle immediately, their dark eyes following her every movement with obvious adoration. Mrs. Chen bustled about the kitchen, preparing fresh orange juice and cutting fruit, occasionally glancing at Emma with poorly concealed amazement. In 30 years of working for the Harrison family, she'd never seen anything quite like what had happened at the wedding reception. "Mr. Harrison," Mrs. Chen said quietly, pulling him aside near the coffee maker. "I spoke with my friend at Children's Services again this morning. Emma's case is complicated. She's been living independently for 8 months, which shows remarkable resilience, but also indicates possible trauma responses. They'll want to conduct thorough psychological evaluations before placing her anywhere permanently." Richard nodded grimly. He'd expected as much. The system would want to study Emma, analyze her, put her through batteries of tests to understand how she'd survived and what kind of permanent placement would be appropriate. "What happens in the meantime?" he asked. "They'll want to place her in temporary foster care while they conduct their assessments. There's a family in Springfield who specializes in children who've experienced trauma and homelessness. They're good people, but—" Mrs. Chen hesitated. "But Emma's been through something extraordinary, Mr. Harrison. Not just the homelessness and survival, but this connection with Mrs. Margaret. She needs stability, but she also needs people who understand that she's experienced something beyond normal child psychology." Through the kitchen doorway, Richard watched Emma gently singing to the twins, while Rebecca, who had stayed the night, marveled over her baby brother's transformation. His daughter had postponed her honeymoon indefinitely, fascinated by the miraculous change in the babies, and clearly smitten with their young caretaker. "She saved them," Rebecca had whispered to him at dawn, when they'd discovered the twins had slept through the entire night for the first time in their lives. "Dad, she literally saved them. And I think she saved you too." It was true. For 3 months, Richard had been drowning in grief and exhaustion, barely able to function as a single father to infant twins while running his construction company. The constant crying had made him question everything, his ability to parent at his age, whether Margaret's death had somehow left a curse on their children, whether he was strong enough to carry on alone. But watching Emma laugh as Matthew grabbed at her finger with his tiny fist, seeing Michael's face light up whenever she entered the room, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced since Margaret died: genuine hope for the future. "Mrs. Chen," he said suddenly, his voice filled with determination, "what would it take for me to become Emma's temporary guardian, just until we can figure out what's truly best for her?" The housekeeper's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Mr. Harrison, are you absolutely certain about this? Foster care, guardianship, these are incredibly complicated legal processes, and you already have your hands completely full with the twins." "Look at them," Richard said, gesturing toward the kitchen where Emma was now teaching Rebecca the exact hand gestures that made the babies giggle with delight. "She belongs here, Mrs. Chen. I don't pretend to understand how or why, but Margaret somehow led her to us at exactly the right moment. I will not, let the system swallow her up and separate her from the boys who need her." Mrs. Chen studied his face carefully. She'd worked for the Harrison family long enough to recognize when Richard had made up his mind about something. Once he decided on a course of action, nothing in heaven or earth could change his direction. "I'll make some calls," she said finally. 3 weeks later, Emma sat in the lawyer's office between Richard and Rebecca, wearing a new blue dress that Rebecca had bought for her during a shopping trip that had lasted 6 hours and resulted in enough clothes to fill an entire closet. The official paperwork for temporary guardianship was spread across the polished mahogany table, waiting for final signatures that would change all their lives forever. "Now, Emma," said Mrs. Patterson, the social worker assigned to her case, "you understand that Mr. Harrison wants to take care of you and provide you with a stable home, but you still have choices in this matter. If you'd prefer to try living with a traditional foster family, one that specializes in children who've been through experiences like yours—" "No, ma'am," Emma interrupted politely, but with unmistakable firmness. "I want to stay with Mr. Richard and the babies. They need me, and I need them too. We're supposed to be together." It was absolutely true. Over the past 3 weeks, the transformation in the Harrison household had been nothing short of miraculous. The twins, who had been labelled severely colicky by every pediatrician they'd consulted, were now happy, healthy babies who slept through the night and spent their days cooing, laughing and reaching for Emma whenever she came within sight. She'd become their unofficial caretaker, always knowing exactly when they needed feeding, changing, or just a soft song to settle their nerves. But the changes went far deeper than just baby care. Richard, who had been a hollow shell of himself since Margaret's death, was beginning to smile again, to find joy in simple moments. He'd started teaching Emma how to read more advanced books, helping her with mathematics that challenged her quick mind, and listening with genuine interest to her stories about survival on the bridge. In return, Emma had brought laughter and purpose back into the mansion's previously quiet halls. "There is one significant concern we need to address," Mrs. Patterson continued, adjusting her glasses and consulting her thick file. "Emma's education. She's been out of school for almost 9 months, and while she's clearly intelligent, she'll need substantial support to catch up to her proper grade level." "Ooh, we've already arranged for comprehensive tutoring," Rebecca interjected smoothly. "Sarah Mitchell, who used to teach at Emma's old elementary school, will work with her 4 times a week until she's ready to enroll in regular classes again. We've also hired Dr. Elizabeth Crane, a child psychologist who specializes in gifted children who've experienced trauma." Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Do I really have to go back to regular school eventually? I mean, with all the other kids and rules and everything?" "Education is incredibly important, sweetheart," Richard said gently, reaching over to squeeze her small hand. "But we'll make absolutely sure you're ready first, and we'll find a school environment where you feel safe and supported." "What if the other kids ask questions about where I've been, about living on the bridge?" Emma's voice was small, vulnerable in a way that made Richard's heart ache. The room fell quiet. Over the past weeks, Emma had shared fragments of her experiences: the terrifying cold of winter nights under the overpass, the constant hunger, the fear of being discovered by people who might hurt her rather than help her. But she'd also talked about unexpected kindnesses from strangers, the fierce independence she'd developed, and most importantly, the regular visits from the gentle spirit who taught her songs and gave her hope. "You tell them whatever feels comfortable to you," Rebecca said firmly. "But Emma, I want you to understand something very important. You never ever have to be ashamed of surviving. What you did, taking care of yourself for 8 months, took incredible courage and strength. Most adults couldn't have done what you did." Emma nodded thoughtfully, but Richard could see the worry still lingering in her bright blue eyes. He understood completely. After months of complete independence and self-reliance, the idea of returning to a structured environment with authority figures and social expectations would be overwhelming for any child, let alone one who had experienced what Emma had. "One step at a time," he promised her, his voice gentle but sure. "We'll figure everything out together, as a family." As the lawyer prepared the final documents and Mrs. Patterson made her final notes, Richard felt Margaret's presence so strongly it nearly took his breath away. This remarkable little girl, who had appeared at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right song, was meant to be part of their family. Every instinct he'd developed over 62 years of life told him this was absolutely right. The papers were signed, the legal formalities completed, and Emma Louise Miller officially became a member of the Harrison household. As they walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright afternoon sunshine, Emma slipped her small hand into Richard's weathered one and looked up at him with complete trust. "Thank you for keeping me," she said simply. "Thank you for saving us," he replied, meaning every word. 2 months after the guardianship was finalized, Richard stood in the doorway of what had once been his private study, watching Emma work with her tutor in the room that had been completely transformed into a combination library and classroom. Child-sized furniture replaced his heavy oak desk, educational posters covered the mahogany-paneled walls, and sunlight streamed through windows that had been fitted with cheerful yellow curtains Emma had chosen herself. "She's absolutely remarkable," Sarah Mitchell said softly, joining him in the doorway with a stack of completed worksheets in her hands. "In 8 weeks, she's advanced almost 2 full grade levels. Her reading comprehension is actually above average for a 9-year-old, and her mathematical reasoning is extraordinary. But there's something else, Mr. Harrison, something I've never encountered in 30 years of teaching." Richard wasn't surprised by Emma's academic progress. The little girl had always displayed an intuitive understanding of complex concepts that seemed far beyond her 7 years. She'd adapted to life in the mansion with remarkable grace, maintaining her gentle, independent spirit while learning the intricate rhythms of their unusual household with the efficiency of someone much older. "What do you mean by something else?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew. Sarah hesitated, clearly struggling to articulate something that defied her professional experience. It's her emotional intelligence, her ability to understand people's needs before they even express them. Yesterday, she knew I was getting a migraine before I felt the first symptom. She brought me water and suggested we move to a darker room. And with the twins, she shook her head in amazement. The twins, now 7 months old, were thriving beyond every medical expectation. They'd grown chubby and content under Emma's devoted care, reaching all their developmental milestones weeks ahead of schedule. Their pediatrician, Dr. Williams, had declared them the healthiest, most well-adjusted babies he'd seen in 40 years of practice. More importantly, they'd formed an unbreakable bond with their young caretaker that went far beyond normal sibling affection. "Michael won't sleep unless Emma sings to him first," Richard mused. "And Matthew actually crawled for the first time while trying to reach her when she was sitting across the room." "It's more than that," Sarah continued. "Watch them together sometime. Really watch. The babies respond to her moods, her energy. When she's happy, they're alert and playful. When she's sad or worried, they become protective, trying to comfort her. It's like they're emotionally connected in a way that transcends normal human interaction." Richard had noticed the same phenomenon. Several times, he'd seen the twins become fussy moments before Emma entered a room, as if they sensed her approach. And last week, when Emma had been upset about a difficult math problem, both babies had crawled to her and laid their tiny hands on her legs, offering comfort with an understanding that seemed impossible for 7-month-old infants. "Mr. Richard." Emma appeared at his elbow, having finished her lessons for the day. Her blonde hair, now properly cared for and shining with health, was pulled back in the braids Rebecca had taught her to make. "The babies are awake from their nap, and I was wondering, could you tell me more about the songs Mrs. Margaret used to hum? I keep hearing new melodies in my dreams, and I think they might be hers." Richard's throat tightened. Over the past months, Emma had asked careful questions about Margaret, clearly trying to understand the supernatural connection she'd experienced while being sensitive to his grief. He'd shared countless stories about his late wife, but Emma's dreams about new songs were something entirely different. "What kind of melodies, sweetheart?" "Happy ones, mostly. Songs about growing up and learning to ride bicycles and starting school, like she's still writing music for the boys as they get bigger." Emma's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you think she knows how much they've grown? How Michael can almost sit up by himself now, and how Matthew laughs when I make funny faces?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. "I think she knows everything about them, Emma, and I think she's grateful every day that you're here to love them." From the nursery down the hall came the sound of babbling voices and gentle laughter. Emma's face lit up immediately. "They're talking to each other again. They do that every afternoon when they wake up, like they're sharing secrets." Richard followed Emma toward the nursery, marveling as always at how naturally she'd stepped into her role as the twins' protector and guide. But as they approached the room, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. The babies weren't just babbling randomly, they were making rhythmic sounds, almost like they were trying to sing together. Da-da-da-da, ma-ma-ma-ma, came the melodic babbling from the nursery, and Richard realized with a shock that the rhythm matched exactly the lullaby Emma had sung at the wedding. The twins were trying to sing their mother's song. Emma gasped softly and hurried into the nursery, where Michael and Matthew sat facing each other in their cribs, their tiny hands reaching through the bars toward one another as they continued their musical conversation. The moment they saw Emma, both babies erupted in delighted squeals and reached for her with obvious excitement. "They've been doing this for 3 days now," Emma said, lifting Michael while Richard picked up Matthew. "Always the same rhythm, always when they first wake up. It's like they remember the song even though they were crying too hard to really hear it the first time." Richard felt goosebumps rise on his arms. The babies had been 3 months old at the wedding, old enough to form memories but too young to understand language. Yet somehow, Margaret's lullaby had imprinted itself so deeply in their consciousness that they were now trying to recreate it. "Has anything else unusual happened?" he asked, settling into the rocking chair with Matthew while Emma sat in the window seat with Michael. Emma bit her lip, clearly debating whether to share something. "Well, sometimes when I'm singing to them, I hear a voice singing harmony. A woman's voice, very soft and beautiful. And sometimes I smell those white flowers, even though it's October and nothing's blooming outside. Jasmine." Margaret's perfume had always been jasmine. Richard's hands began to tremble slightly as he processed what Emma was telling him. "Does this frighten you?" "Oh no," Emma said immediately. "It makes me feel safe, like someone's watching over all of us. The babies seem to hear it too. They get this peaceful expression, like they recognize the voice." Before Richard could respond, the doorbell rang downstairs, followed by Mrs. Chen's voice calling that Dr. Williams had arrived for the twins' routine checkup. As they prepared to take the babies downstairs, Emma suddenly grabbed Richard's arm. "Mr. Richard, there's something else I need to tell you, something important." "What is it, sweetheart?" "I've been having dreams about Mrs. Margaret again, but they're different now. She's not sad anymore. She's happy, and she keeps showing me things, pictures of the boys when they're older, walking and talking and going to school, and in every picture I'm there with them. She tells me that this is how it was always supposed to be, that everything happened exactly the way it needed to happen." Richard felt tears burning behind his eyes. "Emma, do you really believe that? That your mama dying, and you living on the bridge, and finding us at the wedding, do you think it was all part of some bigger plan?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I think sometimes terrible things have to happen so that beautiful things can happen later. My mama had to go to heaven so she could meet Mrs. Margaret. And Mrs. Margaret had to go to heaven so she could send me to find you and the babies. It's like they're working together now, making sure we're all okay." Dr. Williams's examination of the twins was nothing short of extraordinary. At 7 months old, Michael and Matthew were exceeding every developmental milestone. Their motor skills, cognitive responses, and social interactions were all advanced for their age. Most remarkably, their emotional regulation was perfect. They rarely cried, slept through the night consistently, and showed none of the anxiety or attachment issues that often affected children who'd lost a parent. "Mr. Harrison, Dr. Williams said, as he packed up his equipment, "I've been practicing pediatric medicine for 4 decades, and I've never seen anything quite like this. These babies are thriving in ways that seem almost impossible given their traumatic start in life. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "It's not me," Richard said, watching Emma gently rock Michael while humming softly. "It's her. She's given them something I never could have provided alone." Dr. Williams observed Emma for several minutes, noting how the babies responded to her every movement and sound. Has she had any formal training in child development or infant care? None whatsoever. She's been learning as she goes, purely on instinct. Remarkable. The bond between them is unlike anything I've seen between siblings, even twins. It's almost as if they share some kind of deeper connection. After the doctor left, Richard found himself alone with Emma in the kitchen while the twins napped upstairs. She was helping Mrs. Chen prepare dinner, her small hands competently chopping vegetables with the skill of someone much older. "Emma," he said carefully, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter how the boys grow up or what the future brings, you'll always be part of this family. Always." Emma smiled, but Richard detected a shadow of worry in her expression. "What do you mean, no matter what happens? Is something wrong?" Richard realized his words had inadvertently frightened her. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I just want you to feel secure, to know that this is your home forever if you want it to be." "I do want it to be," Emma said quietly, "but sometimes I worry that when the boys get older they won't need me anymore, and then maybe you won't need me either." The vulnerability in her voice broke Richard's heart. "Oh, Emma, we will always need you. You're not just the baby's caretaker, you're their sister and you're my daughter. That's not something that changes." Christmas morning arrived with a fresh snowfall that transformed the Harrison mansion into something from a fairy tale. Emma woke before dawn, as she had every morning for the past 5 months. But today she lay in her bed for a few extra minutes, marveling at how different this Christmas was from the last one. A year ago, she'd been huddled under the bridge with her dying mother, trying to keep warm with a threadbare blanket and dreaming of the Christmases they used to have when her father was alive and they lived in the little house on Maple Street. Now she was in a room that was bigger than their entire former apartment, with more presents under the tree downstairs than she'd received in her entire life. But the real miracle wasn't the material comfort. It was the family that had somehow formed around her and the twins. Richard had legally adopted her 3 weeks ago, making her Emma Louise Harrison. Rebecca visited almost daily, bringing new books and clothes and treating Emma like the little sister she'd never had. Even David had warmed up to their unusual family, often stopping by after work to play with the twins and help Emma with her homework. The babies were now 9 months old, and their personalities were emerging in delightful ways. Michael was the serious one, studying everything intently before acting, while Matthew was more impulsive and adventurous. Both boys had started pulling themselves up to standing, and Michael had taken his first wobbly steps just 2 days ago, reaching for Emma across the living room. As Emma made her way downstairs, she found Richard already in the kitchen with the twins, both boys babbling excitedly at the sight of the elaborately decorated Christmas tree visible through the doorway. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," Richard said, pulling Emma into a warm hug. "How did you sleep?" "I had the most wonderful dream," Emma replied, settling into her chair and accepting the cup of hot chocolate Mrs. Chen had prepared. "Mrs. Margaret was there, and my mama too. They were sitting together, watching us open presents and laughing about how excited the boys were going to be." Richard had grown accustomed to Emma's dreams about their deceased wives, and they no longer frightened him. Instead, he found them comforting, as if Margaret and Linda were truly watching over their unconventional family from somewhere beyond. "What else happened in the dream?" he asked. "They told me that this was just the beginning, that there would be many more Christmases and birthdays and family celebrations, and they said—" Emma hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. "What did they say?" "They said that someday, when I'm grown up, I'll understand why everything happened the way it did, and that I'll help other children who are lost and scared, the way Mrs. Margaret helped me." Before Richard could respond, Matthew managed to pull himself up to standing in his high chair and reached toward Emma with determination, babbling what sounded remarkably like, "Emma." "Did he just say my name?" Emma gasped, immediately moving to lift him from the chair. "I think he did," Richard laughed. "His first word, and it's your name instead of Mama or Dada." As if not to be outdone, Michael also pulled himself up and made similar sounds, his arms outstretched toward Emma. Both boys had been showing signs of advanced language development, often seeming to understand complex instructions and responding to their names and familiar words. The morning was filled with the chaos and joy of toddlers experiencing their first real Christmas. The twins were more interested in the wrapping paper and boxes than the actual toys, but they squealed with delight when Emma showed them how to make the various musical instruments and educational games work. Rebecca and David arrived around noon, bringing even more presents and news that made Richard's heart swell with pride. "Dad, I have something to tell you," Rebecca said, settling on the couch with Matthew in her lap while Michael played with blocks at Emma's feet. "David and I have been talking, and we've decided to start trying for children of our own. Watching Emma with the boys, seeing how beautiful a large family can be, it's changed our perspective on everything." Emma looked up from her book, her face lighting up. "Does that mean I might get to be a big sister to even more babies?" "If we're lucky," David said, grinning, "though I don't know if we'll be able to find anyone as gifted with children as you are, Emma." As the day progressed, Richard found himself observing his family with deep contentment. Emma had transformed from a frightened, homeless child into a confident, loving young girl who seemed to instinctively know how to nurture and guide the twins. The boys, meanwhile, had developed into happy, healthy toddlers who showed no signs of the trauma they'd experienced in their earliest months. But it was more than just successful child-rearing. There was something almost magical about the way they all fit together, as if each person had been specifically chosen to complement the others. Emma's gentle wisdom balanced Richard's sometimes overwhelming protectiveness. The twins brought joy and laughter to Emma's previously difficult life. And somehow, Margaret's presence still seemed to guide them all, ensuring that her sons grew up surrounded by love. That evening, as they sat around the fireplace with the twins finally asleep in their portable cribs nearby, Emma curled up against Richard's side and spoke the words that made this the most perfect Christmas he could have imagined. "Thank you for making me part of your family," she whispered. "I love you, Daddy." The call came on a Tuesday morning in late January, shattering the peaceful routine the Harrison family had established over the past 8 months. Richard was in his home office, reviewing construction blueprints while Emma did her morning lessons with Sarah in the converted study. The twins were playing contentedly in their nursery, with Mrs. Chen supervising, their happy babbling providing a cheerful soundtrack to the winter day. "Mr. Harrison!" Mrs. Chen appeared in his doorway, her face pale and worried. "There's a woman here to see you. She says she's from the Department of Children and Family Services, and she has some questions about Emma's placement." Richard's blood ran cold. They'd had no contact with DCFS since Emma's adoption was finalized 6 weeks ago. Legally, she was now his daughter in every sense of the word, with no outstanding issues or concerns that he was aware of. "Send her in," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman who entered his office was in her 40s, professionally dressed, with short greying hair and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much heartbreak in her career. She introduced herself as Janet Morrison, a senior investigator with the department. "Mr. Harrison, I apologize for arriving unannounced, but we've received some concerning information about Emma's case that requires immediate investigation." "What kind of information?" Richard asked, gesturing for her to sit while his mind raced through possibilities. 3 days ago, we received an anonymous tip alleging that Emma's adoption was obtained through fraudulent means. The caller claimed that you coerced or bribed officials to fast-track the process, and that Emma is being exploited as unpaid childcare for your biological children. Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "That's absolutely ridiculous. Emma is my daughter. She's loved and cared for exactly like any biological child would be. I understand this is upsetting, Ms. Morrison continued, but I'm required to conduct a thorough investigation. This includes interviewing Emma privately, observing her interactions with the family, and reviewing all documentation related to her care and education. Of course, Richard said, though every parental instinct screamed against allowing a stranger to interrogate his daughter. Emma has nothing to hide, and neither do I. But I want you to understand something. That little girl has been through more trauma in her 8 years than most adults experience in a lifetime. She's finally feeling safe and secure. I won't allow anything to jeopardize that. Ms. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Mr. Harrison, I've read Emma's file. I know about her mother's death, her time living homeless, and the circumstances of how she came to be with your family. My job isn't to disrupt successful placements. It's to ensure children are truly safe and thriving. Then you'll see immediately that Emma is thriving, Richard said firmly. She's advanced 2 grade levels academically. She's healthy and happy, and she has a bond with my sons that goes beyond anything I could have hoped for. About that bond, Ms. Morrison said, consulting her notes, the anonymous caller made some specific claims about Emma being treated more like a nanny than a daughter. Allegations that she's responsible for the majority of childcare duties and that her own needs are secondary to those of the twins. Richard felt anger building in his chest. Someone was deliberately trying to destroy his family, and he had a growing suspicion about who it might be. Ms. Morrison, I'd like you to meet Emma and observe our family yourself before we continue this conversation. I think you'll find the reality is very different from what you've been told. 20 minutes later, Emma sat in the living room with Ms. Morrison, answering questions with the poised confidence of someone much older. The twins were nearby in their playpen, occasionally babbling or reaching toward Emma, who would automatically respond with gentle words or songs without interrupting her conversation. Emma, I want you to tell me about a typical day in your life, Ms. Morrison said. What time do you wake up? What do you do? How do you spend your time? I wake up around 6:30, usually because Michael and Matthew are starting to stir in their cribs, Emma replied thoughtfully. I help give them their morning bottles while Daddy makes breakfast. Then I have lessons with Miss Sarah for 3 hours while Mrs. Chen watches the boys. After lunch, we all play together, and sometimes Daddy teaches me about his construction business. In the evening, I help with the baby's bedtime routine because they sleep better when I sing to them. Do you feel like you have enough time for yourself? Time to just be a kid? Emma's forehead wrinkled in confusion. But I am being a kid. This is what I want to do. The boys are my brothers, and I love taking care of them. Nobody makes me do it. What would happen if you told your father you didn't want to help with the babies anymore? Would he be angry? He'd be worried that something was wrong, Emma said immediately. Because helping with Michael and Matthew isn't a chore for me. It's like breathing. I can't imagine not wanting to be with them. Ms. Morrison spent 2 hours observing the family's interactions, watching Richard's gentle patience with both Emma and the twins, noting how naturally Emma shifted between being a regular 8-year-old and stepping into her role as big sister. She saw no signs of coercion, exploitation, or inappropriate responsibility being placed on the child. Mr. Harrison, she said as she prepared to leave, I want to be completely transparent with you. Based on what I've observed today, this anonymous complaint appears to be completely unfounded. Emma is clearly thriving in your care, and her attachment to the twins seems both natural and healthy. Then why do I feel like this isn't over? Richard asked. Ms. Morrison hesitated, because whoever made this complaint provided very specific details about your family's routine, details that suggest they have intimate knowledge of your household. This wasn't a random report from a concerned stranger. Someone with access to your private life is trying to cause problems. As the investigator's car disappeared down the driveway, Richard realized their peaceful, protected world was about to become much more complicated. The answer to who was trying to destroy their family came the following week in the form of a certified letter that made Richard's hands shake with fury. The return address showed the law offices of Caldwell, Brennan and Associates, David's father's firm. Inside was a petition for custody review filed by Margaret's sister, Patricia Henley, claiming that Richard was unfit to raise the twins and that Emma represented a danger to their well-being. The document alleged that Emma's unnatural influence over the babies was evidence of psychological manipulation, and that Richard's emotional dependence on a troubled child was compromising his judgment as a father. Richard had to read the petition 3 times before the full horror of it sank in. Patricia, who had barely spoken to Margaret in the 10 years before her death, was now claiming she had always intended to raise the twins if anything happened to her sister. She was demanding immediate custody and Emma's removal from the household. "That woman hasn't seen these babies since Margaret's funeral," Richard said to his lawyer, James Crawford, who had driven over immediately after receiving his own copy of the petition. "She sent a sympathy card and a flower arrangement, and then disappeared completely. Unfortunately, Mr. Harrison, biological relatives often have significant advantages in custody disputes, especially when they can present evidence of instability in the current household," Crawford replied grimly. "And Patricia's legal team has built their case specifically around Emma's presence in your home." The strategy was diabolically clever. Patricia's lawyers were arguing that Richard's decision to adopt a homeless child with an unknown psychological history demonstrated poor judgment. They claimed Emma's supernatural connection to the twins, which they characterized as evidence of mental illness rather than a miraculous bond, was potentially harmful to the baby's development. "They're using Emma's gifts against her," Richard said, his voice thick with disgust. "They're taking the most beautiful thing about our family and twisting it into something sinister." "There's more," Crawford said reluctantly. "They've also filed a motion requesting psychological evaluations for both you and Emma, claiming that your attachment to her represents grief-induced delusion that's affecting your parenting abilities." Richard felt like he was drowning. In the space of 1 week, his family had gone from complete happiness to fighting for their very existence. The irony was devastating. Emma, who had saved the twins from months of inconsolable crying and brought peace to their household, was now being portrayed as a threat to their well-being. "What do we do?" he asked. "We fight," Crawford said firmly. "We document everything. Emma's academic progress, the twins' developmental milestones, testimony from Dr. Williams about their exceptional health. We show the court that this is a loving, stable family where all 3 children are thriving." That evening, Richard sat Emma down for the most difficult conversation of his life. She listened quietly as he explained Patricia's petition, her young face growing paler with each detail. "They want to take Michael and Matthew away," she whispered. "But they belong with us. They need us." "I know, sweetheart, and we're going to fight to keep our family together. But I need you to understand that the next few months are going to be very hard. There will be lawyers and judges and people asking you lots of questions about our family." Emma was quiet for a long moment, and Richard could see the wheels turning in her bright mind. "The anonymous phone call to the child services lady, that came from Patricia, didn't it?" Richard was constantly amazed by Emma's perceptiveness. "We think so, yes. She's trying to make it seem like I'm hurting the boys instead of helping them." Emma's voice was steady, but Richard could see tears threatening in her eyes. Just like some of the older kids on the bridge used to say I was weird because I talked about seeing my mama sometimes. Emma, listen to me very carefully, Richard said, taking her small hands in his larger ones. There is nothing weird or wrong or frightening about you. You have a gift, a beautiful, miraculous gift that saved this family. And no matter what Patricia's lawyers try to say, no matter how they try to twist the truth, I will never stop fighting for you and the boys. What if they take them away? Emma asked, the question every adult in the situation was afraid to voice. Then we'll get them back, Richard said with fierce determination. Because this is their home, and you are their sister, and no court in the world is going to convince me that separating you three is in anyone's best interest. That night, as Richard checked on the children before bed, he found Emma in the twins' nursery, sitting between their cribs and singing softly. Michael and Matthew, now 10 months old and starting to cruise around furniture, had both pulled themselves up to standing and were holding onto their crib rails, gazing at Emma with obvious adoration. The lullaby she sang was one he'd never heard before, with a melody that seemed to wrap around his heart and squeeze. No matter where the wind may blow, no matter how the storms may rage, love will keep us safe and warm. Love will turn each frightened page. We are family, you and me. Nothing else will ever matter. Though the world may try to break us, love will never let us scatter. As the last notes faded away, both babies settled peacefully into their cribs, their eyes never leaving Emma's face until sleep finally claimed them. Richard realized that no matter what the courts decided, no matter what legal battles lay ahead, he was looking at something that transcended law and logic and human understanding. This was a family bound together by forces far stronger than blood or legal documents, and he would die before he let anyone destroy it. The courtroom was packed on the morning of the custody hearing, 6 weeks after Patricia's initial petition had shattered their peaceful world. Richard sat at the plaintiff's table with his legal team, watching Emma in the gallery between Rebecca and Mrs. Chen. The 8-year-old girl looked impossibly small in her navy blue dress, but her chin was raised with quiet determination. The twins, now 11 months old and walking with increasing confidence, had been left at home with a court-appointed supervisor, a precaution that made Richard's heart ache. For the first time since Emma had entered their lives, Michael and Matthew had spent a night away from their sister, and according to Mrs. Chen, they had cried inconsolably until dawn. Patricia Henley took the stand first, presenting herself as a concerned aunt who had only learned of the twins' disturbing situation through mutual friends. She painted a picture of Richard as a grief-stricken widower who had made dangerously poor decisions in his desperation to replace his dead wife. "Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "my sister Margaret would be horrified to know that her precious sons are being raised by a homeless child who claims to communicate with the dead. This is not a stable environment for developing minds." Her lawyer called a parade of witnesses, child psychologists who had never met Emma but were willing to testify about the dangers of parentification and magical thinking in developing children. They presented Emma's gifts as symptoms of trauma-induced psychosis that could be transmitted to the impressionable twins. When it was their turn, Richard's legal team painted a very different picture. Dr. Williams testified about the twins' exceptional health and development. Sarah Mitchell spoke about Emma's remarkable academic progress and emotional maturity. Mrs. Chen described the peaceful, loving household she witnessed every day. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. "Your Honor," said Dr. Elizabeth Crane, the child psychologist who had been working with Emma, "in 30 years of practice, I have never encountered a child with Emma's combination of resilience, empathy, and intuitive understanding of others' needs. What Patricia Henley's experts characterize as mental illness, I recognize as an extraordinary emotional intelligence that has been developed through adversity. Dr. Crane presented months of evaluation data showing Emma's psychological health, her secure attachment to Richard, and most importantly, her profound positive impact on the twins' development. The bond between Emma and the Harrison twins is not supernatural or unhealthy, Dr. Crane continued. It's the result of a child who has learned to survive by becoming exceptionally attuned to others' emotional states. She reads their needs with remarkable accuracy because her own survival once depended on reading people correctly. Finally, it was Emma's turn to testify. The judge had initially hesitated to put such a young child on the stand, but Emma had requested the opportunity to speak for herself. She walked to the witness stand with steady steps, her blonde hair gleaming under the courtroom lights, and raised her right hand to be sworn in with the solemnity of someone much older. "Emma," said Richard's lawyer gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with Michael and Matthew?" "They're my brothers," Emma said simply. "Not because a judge said so, but because we chose each other. When I first met them, they were crying because they missed their mama. I sang to them, and they stopped crying because they knew I understood what it felt like to lose someone you love. Do you feel like you're forced to take care of them?" Emma's forehead wrinkled in confusion. "Nobody forces me to love them. That's like asking if someone forces me to breathe. What would happen if you were separated from the twins?" For the first time, Emma's composure cracked slightly. "They would be so scared," she whispered, "and I would be scared too. We belong together. Mrs. Margaret brought us together, and nobody should be able to break that apart." Patricia's lawyer attempted to cross-examine Emma, trying to get her to admit that she felt burdened by responsibility or that Richard had pressured her to care for the babies. But Emma answered each question with such clear, honest simplicity that even the hostile attorney seemed affected by her sincerity. "Emma," he said finally, "do you really believe that a dead woman led you to find these babies?" Emma looked directly at Patricia, who was sitting in the front row with her arms crossed and her mouth set in a hard line. "I believe that love is stronger than death," Emma said quietly, "and I believe that Mrs. Margaret loved her sons so much that she found a way to make sure they would never be alone or scared. She brought me to them, and she brought them to me, because we all needed each other." The judge deliberated for less than an hour. While the court recognizes Patricia Henley's sincere concern for her nephew's welfare, Judge Richardson announced, the evidence clearly demonstrates that Michael and Matthew Harrison are thriving in their current environment. Emma Harrison's presence in the household has been nothing but beneficial to these children, and Richard Harrison has proven himself to be a devoted and capable father. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court finds no credible evidence to support claims that Emma's emotional connection to the twins represents anything other than a normal, healthy sibling bond. The petition for custody modification is denied. As the gavel fell, Richard felt 10 months of fear and tension drain from his body. Emma flew into his arms, tears streaming down her face, while Rebecca and Mrs. Chen wept openly in the gallery. That evening, as they drove home together, Emma asked the question that had been weighing on all their minds. "Do you think Mrs. Margaret knew this would happen? The court case and everything?" Richard considered this carefully. "I think she knew that love always finds a way to win, even when everything seems impossible." When they arrived home, the twins were waiting in the living room with their court-appointed supervisor, both boys babbling excitedly and reaching for Emma the moment she walked through the door. As she gathered them into her arms, both children immediately calmed, settling against her with sighs of complete contentment. "We're home," Emma whispered, and Richard knew she was speaking not just to the twins, but to Margaret and Linda, wherever they were watching. "We're all home and we're never going to be separated again." Outside, The first snow of winter began to fall, but inside the Harrison mansion, their family was finally, permanently and completely whole.